and welcome back to another episode. In this video, I want to discuss Scott Adams' book, Win Bigly, or at least the first chapter of it, in terms of persuasion. I'm very interested in persuasion, what makes things persuasive, and I think it can be very useful in your own life, because in life you have to deal with people, and you often have to convince them of your point of view. So, the first chapter in Scott's book is called About Facts. And I think it's very important to kind of begin by defining what persuasion is and what it isn't. So, persuasion is all about the tools and techniques of changing people's minds with or without reason. And the reason why I want to point that out is I've seen a number of Scott Adams interviews now, and some people who misunderstand persuasion try and make it seem like it's some kind of hypnosis, or that you're making people in an ethical way believe things that are not true. And this is not the case. Persuasion is all about changing people's minds to kind of to see things your way. Now, Donald Trump was exceptionally good at this, and Scott Adams immediately saw him as being a master persuader, or what he calls a master persuader. And this is why he was able to make the prediction that Donald Trump would win the presidency way back in the Republican primaries, when he was polling at 2%. Another good example of a master persuader is Steve Jobs. And when you read about Steve Jobs or his history, he's often said to have had a reality distortion field, where he was able to persuade people to see things his way. And we'll talk a little bit more about Steve Jobs later on in this presentation. Now, one of the main persuasion tactics that Donald Trump uses, and you see it time and time again, is what Scott calls the intentional wrongness play. And this is basically how it works. So you make a claim that is directionally correct and accurate, but has a big exaggeration or even an error in it of some kind. You then sit back, and this could be tough because you're going to be coming under intense criticism, but you wait for people to notice the exaggeration or the error, and you spend endless hours talking about it. Now, what this does, though, from a persuasion perspective, is this promotes energy and focus onto the idea that you're interested in. So, with the focus, you'll remember it, and it will become more important to you. And that is persuasion personified. So, some examples of this. So, Scott Adams himself used this. And he used this when he made the prediction that Trump had a 98% chance of winning the general election. And once again, he made this prediction when the Republican primaries were still going on, Jeb Bush was still in the race, and Donald Trump was polling at 2%. Now, what this did, though, was it focused the attention on Scott Adams and his prediction. At this time, he was known as the cartoonist as Dilbert. He wasn't a political prognosticator or a political guru of any kind, or he didn't have that reputation. Now, if he had just said, I think Donald Trump could possibly win, people would just ignore it. But when he made a prediction that was so high, and he put a number to it, so it seems so firm, people look at that and say, you can't possibly be serious, that's wrong. He got criticism for it, but he also got attention, and that's the key thing. As a bit of a side note, although it's related, the reason why he picked 98% was that Nate Silver, who was kind of known as the great polling guru, put the odds of Donald Trump winning at 2%. So when Scott made the 98% prediction, it fit nicely as a contrast to Nate Silver's prediction. And initially, this was used to mock Scott Adams, saying that, a real person, Nate Silver, a real political polling person, is saying 2%, the stupid cartoonist is saying 98%. But what it's doing, though, is in your mind, is associating Scott Adams with Nate Silver. So if Nate Silver is up here as far as being a political guru, it raises Scott Adams up to his level. Or you're now associating Nate Silver with Scott Adams all over the place. And that's a branding exercise that worked quite well for him. So, once again, people perceived this as wrong, they argue against it, but people remembered it, and it raised Scott's profile and made his prediction much more widely known. Branding. Now, some Trump examples, I'm going to relate two. One from the past and one much more recent that just occurred, but it's constantly happening if you actually really read Trump's tweets. Now, one of his most famous campaign promises early on was that he was going to build a wall with Mexico and they would pay for it. Now, you can attack this idea in any number of ways. You can't, for example, just from a practical standpoint, you can't build a solid wall all the way along the Mexican-U.S. border. The terrain simply doesn't allow it. So if you wanted to be more accurate, you could say, well, in some parts we're going to have fences, some parts we're going to have drones to guard it, however you want to say it. And of course the idea too that you're going to get Mexico to pay for this wall probably wasn't going to happen. So you have lots of ways to attack the idea, which is what people did. But what's happening? You're getting attention, and you are raising the issue now of border security as being very important. So critics attacking the wall raised the importance of border security, and then who was the most strongest on that issue? Donald Trump. This is when his poll numbers started to go up. Also, by making this prediction or making this promise, it also prevented the press from talking about other issues that Trump might not be as strong on. And that's what master persuaders do. They move your energy and focus to the topics that help them, independent of facts or reason. And like I say though, it's not easy to do, as you often have to endure brutal criticism during the initial sort of critic phase. But if you can hang on, it's very effective. Another important point here is that when you're getting criticized, and you see this with Donald Trump, is that you never clarify and you never apologize. Because when you do, you look weak, and that becomes the focus. So, for example, with Donald Trump on the wall, he never apologized. He very, very rarely would ever say something in the most offhanded way that, oh, maybe there might be a fence in some places, or so Donald Trump just never apologized, and that's why. A much more recent example now with international implications is on December 1st, Trump made what is known as the Muslim tweets, which are the latest example. And what he did was he retweeted 3 tweets from an outfit called Britain First, which is perceived as anti-Muslim, and the videos were anti-Muslim. They were showing Muslims doing some bad things. For example, pushing gays off of a building, I think in Iran, I'm not completely sure. So he has endured the most intense criticism for this. But here's what happened. Now, when he first tweeted this out, he sent it to Theresa May, but he sent it to the wrong Theresa May. So when his critics were attacking him, they were mocking him for this. And then he retweeted 3 videos, and after the critics went through it, it turns out one of them was a fake. And then also the fact that he tweeted this from Britain First, which is considered to be apparently a radical right-wing organization, he endured more criticism. And this has now come from British MPs, including conservative MPs, and just the general press as well. But what's happened now is people's focus is now on culture and immigration, and how cultures can change due to immigration. So for Donald Trump, he has now raised this issue in America, and he's actually hugely affected, I predict now, politics in the United Kingdom, because the attacks on him have been so overwhelming. People look at those videos and say, okay, what's going on here? Some of these videos were actually correct. There is a legitimate issue here regarding immigration and a change in culture, given the terrorist attacks in the United Kingdom, things like the Rotterdam rape gangs, and etc., etc., etc. And the elites may not want to talk about this, but Donald Trump has kind of helped burst through the dam on this, and he has now focused attention on an issue that's important to him and important to a lot of people. And it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out in the coming months. And this is why you keep seeing the same pattern over and over again, where the media keep attacking Donald Trump like Elmer Fudd with fact checks. But Trump always stands his ground. And typically, what the media thinks will be a strong attack on him just winds up blowing up in their face. When they're attacking him with their fact checks, it puts the focus on Donald Trump and makes him impossible to ignore. And this is how he was able to win the presidency. Now, the truth of the matter is, it's not that facts are not important, but facts are weak persuasion because people have their own facts, and if their facts don't agree with your facts, they typically just ignore you. Now, we'll get to some persuasion tips you can use, that I think you can use from this chapter. First one is that humans are hardwired to reciprocate favors. And the example from this chapter was when Scott Adams actually started to talk positively about Trump's persuasion game, and he was immediately attacked viciously. But there were a lot of people who did like Donald Trump, did like what he was talking about, and those people immediately became Scott Adams' biggest boosters. So in that case, he was actually doing them a favor by being seen as pro-Trump, although he wasn't really true pro-Trump as far as policies go. He was just talking about the persuasion game at that point. But people reciprocated that by helping him out. Just another example of this was the Hare Krishnas. Back in the day, I guess maybe in the 70s, the Hare Krishnas were known for hanging around airports and then trying to collect money. But what they would do, though, is they would insist on giving you a flower. And no matter what you did, it was almost impossible to not accept this flower from a Hare Krishna. Now, what that did, though, from a persuasion standpoint, is that it made it much harder for people to resist not giving the Hare Krishnas money. And that's why, for a time, the Hare Krishnas were very successful in their fundraising efforts, until I believe airports actually banned the practice. So for you, if you're watching this, if you need help from someone, find a way to help them first. They are much more likely to help you. Another important point is that persuasion works even if people understand it, or understand that it is in fact a persuasion play. So for example, all stores have prices like $9.99. Now you know why they're doing it, because it makes things look a little bit cheaper. $9.99 is not that much different than $10, yet persuasion-wise, it looks much cheaper. You know this, yet you're still going to go to the stores that sell things at $9.99, which is basically all of them. Third persuasion tip is what you think about most will rise in importance in your mind. So, again, with examples of Trump's wall, all of the attacks on that made border security much more important. When Scott Adams tweeted out 98%, he was attacked by that. Scott Adams started taking up mind share in people, even his critics, and started rising as far as notoriety goes. So if you want someone to see things your way, or to see things that are important to you, don't hit them with facts, but simply find a way for them to think about what you care about more. Persuasion tip number 4 is that intentional errors attract critics, but again, it also attracts their focus, and that raises the level of importance in their mind. So whenever Trump makes an error and people mock him for it, it actually helps him. It helps him every single time. And I'm actually stunned that his critics have not learned this yet. But they like Elmer Fudd, they just can't help themselves. I mean, they're gonna get that rascally rabbit maybe this time, or like, you know, the Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote. It's just bizarre. Another important point from Persuasion is that visuals, emotion, repetition, and simplicity always beat details and facts. So, for example, again, building the wall, Mexico will pay for it. Trump would give speeches, and his audience, he did it so many times, they could almost deliver the speech for him. I remember one where he would say, "What are we going to do?" And then the audience said, "We're going to build a wall. Who's going to pay for it?" The audience responded, "Mexico will pay for it." Again, factually wrong. Very unlikely that was going to happen. But the visuals of building a strong wall, the emotions, the repetition, and the simplicity, people knew what Donald Trump stands for, or stood for at that time. And I doubt any of them knew what Jeb Bush was going to do. The final tip is be aware when you observe other master persuaders in society, because it means there's a good chance they might do something big, which you might be able to take advantage of. For example, I was talking about Steve Jobs being a master persuader, and apparently Scott Adams made a small fortune when he invested in Apple when Steve Jobs came back to the company, I believe in the late 90s. It's almost hard to remember then, but before Steve Jobs came back, Apple was almost bankrupt. It was probably 3 months away from total bankruptcy, and the stock was very, very cheap. But Scott Adams recognized that Steve Jobs was a master persuader, and that he was likely to really maybe do something big. And of course, that's what he did. I mean, if you look at the stock price, it went through the roof. So that's it for now. I'm planning on making more videos like this as I go through the Win Bigly book. If you have any comments or questions on Persuasion, please leave them in the comments below. I'd be very interested in reading them. And that's it for now, and until next time.